Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to be crocheting this really cute button-up top. I'll be making a small in this video, but sizes X small and 3X large are included in this tutorial and also in the written pattern that I have went ahead and linked down below. But here are the supplies you're going to be needing. So the first step to this pattern is that we're going to be working at the back panel first. So to work the back panel, I'm first just going to start off with a slip knot, and you can do that any way you would like. After you have your slip knot, you're going to start off with a chain of 57, and you can make this chain however long or short you would want your sweater to be. I'm going to choose a chain of 57. So to make a chain, you just want to yarn over and pull through. Again, just yarning over and pulling through until you have a total of 57 chains. Once you have finished working this chain of 57, we're going to begin on row 1. So beginning on row 1, skip this first chain, and inserting a hook into the second chain, we're going to work a double crochet. To do that, just yarn over, insert your hook into that second chain, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over, pull through 2. I'm going to do this one more time with you guys, so just yarn over, insert your hook into that next chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, and then yarn over, pull through 2. So now just continue to work these double crochets into each chain all the way across until you have one chain at the end remaining. So I'm just going to quickly work up these double crochets, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I have one chain at the end, and then I'm going to show you guys what to do once we reach that point. So as you guys can see, I have finished working at these double crochets into each of my chains, and I have this last chain at the very end of my row remaining. Into this last chain, we're actually going to be working at 6 double crochets into this last stitch, or into this last chain. So to do that with you guys, I'm just going to yarn over, insert my hook, and then just work 6 of these. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then here is 6, just like this. So now I'm going to turn my work around, but before we work on the opposite side of our work, what I'm actually going to do here is into the first stitch, so the first stitch of our set of 6, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm going to insert a stitch marker. So this is the first of the 6 stitches that we just worked. I'm going to insert a stitch marker into the first one and then also into that last 6th stitch. Just like this, we have 2 of our stitch markers. Now from here, we're going to continue on working these double crochets into each of these stitches on the back side of the loops. So to get you started on that, I'm just going to yarn over into this very first stitch. Just continue to work these double crochets, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I have reached the end of my work. As you guys can see, I have just finished working these double crochets into each stitch all the way across on the opposite side of my work. So once you reach the very end, you just want to chain 1 and then turn your work. Now moving on to row 2, we're going to skip this first turning chain because it does not count as a stitch, and inserting our hook into this first stitch, we're going to work double crochets into each stitch all the way across our work until you reach this very first stitch marker, and then I'm going to show you guys what to do next after we reach this stitch marker. So as you guys can see, I have finished working these double crochets across my row until I have met up with this very first stitch marker. So into the stitch with the stitch marker, we're going to do an increase, which is just working 2 double crochets into this one stitch. So to do that, I'm just going to insert my hook, going to work 1 double crochet, and then into this same stitch, I'm going to go back and work a second double crochet. Now before I lose my place, I'm going to take my stitch marker out, and into this first stitch of our increase, I'm going to insert it back into that top of the stitch just like this. Now into each stitch across until you reach the other stitch marker, we're going to work 2 double crochets, which is going to be increases into each of these 6 stitches. So I'm going to work this, so I'm going to be doing this with you guys. So into this next stitch, I'm going to work 2 double crochets like this. Into the next stitch, working another 2 double crochets. And then here's the next one, 2 double crochets. Now into the stitch with the stitch marker, we're going to work our very last increase. So that's 1 double crochet and then 2 double crochets. I'm going to take my stitch marker out, put this stitch marker into the very top of this stitch, just as we did for the first one, just like this. Now from here, once you have worked all of these 6 increases, you should have 12 stitches total for the corner of your work. Now I'm just going to work double crochets into each stitch all the way across until you have reached the end, and then I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. And just as I mentioned, once you've finished working these double crochets all the way down your row, you can just chain 1 and turn your work. Moving on to row 3, beginning into this first stitch, all we're going to do is just work double crochets until we reach the stitch marker once again, and then I'm going to show you guys what we're going to do once we reach the stitch marker and around the curve. I'm going to work that up, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am done. So I have just finished working all the way down my row with these double crochets until I have this stitch marker right over here. Now this is going to be very similar to what we did with the previous row, but instead of doing an increase into every single stitch, we're going to be doing an increase every other stitch. So to show you what that's going to look like, into this first stitch with the stitch marker, work 1 double crochet. And I'm just going to take this stitch marker out and just put it right back on top, like so. Now into the next stitch, we're going to work an increase. So work 2 double crochets, just like this. Into the next stitch, work 1 regular double crochet, and then an increase into the next stitch. Again, work 1 regular double crochet and then an increase into the next stitch. Now you want to repeat this process, working 1 regular double crochet and then an increase until you have reached the next stitch marker. So I have finished making it all the way around, and I'm going to now do my very last increase into the stitch with the stitch marker. I'm just going to do my last increase here. Now just take your stitch marker out and then put it back on top like this. And you have probably guessed it, we're just going to continue on doing double crochets all the way down until you have reached the end. Chain one, turn your work. So I just finished working down row 3. I'm just going to chain one and turn. Moving on to row 4, starting into this first stitch, we're going to double crochet into each stitch all the way down our work until you have reached the very first stitch marker. Once again, so for the 4th row, this is going to be very similar to the previous row. The previous row, we worked an increase every other stitch, but except for this row, we're going to work an increase every second stitch. To show you what that's going to look like, into the stitch with the stitch marker, we're going to work 2 double crochets. So that's 1 double crochet, and then we're going to work a second double crochet into this next stitch. I'm just going to go ahead and take the stitch marker out before I forget. Just put it right back at the top. So we worked 2 stitches. Now we're going to increase into the next stitch, just like this. Now we're going to do that same thing. We're going to do 2 stitches. So this is 1 and 2. Increase into that next stitch, like this. Work 2 stitches once again. And then another increase. Now just repeat this pattern, working 2 stitches and then an increase until you have reached the second stitch marker over here. So I have made it back to my last set. So I'm going to work 2 more stitches and then an increase into the stitch marker. I'm just going to do this with you guys. So that's 1, 2, and then an increase into the stitch marker. And by the way, for every single row, you should always be ending with an increase into the stitch marker if you're curious. So I'm just going to do this very last increase. And then just take my stitch marker out and put it right back at the top. Now just to finish up row 4, I'm just going to double crochet into each stitch across until I have reached the end of my work. Once you have made it to the end of row 4, I'm just going to chain 1 and turn my work. So as a quick overview to what we have done so far, once you have worked these double crochets and you have reached this very first stitch marker, for row 2 we did an increase every single stitch until you reach the second stitch marker. For row 3 we did an increase every other stitch until you reach that second stitch marker, and then for row 4 we did an increase every third stitch. So to continue this pattern, you want to continue doing that same thing we have been doing. So for the next row, which is row 5, you would work an increase every 4th stitch, for the next row every 5th stitch, for the next row every 6th stitch. Keep on doing that until you have a total of 11 rows for your back panel. So I hope all of that makes sense and you kind of get the hang of this. I'm going to work up my back panel and then I'm going to see you guys back to cut and fasten off. Okay guys, so I have made it back here. I have completed my 11 rows for my back panel. Once I reached the end, I did go ahead, cut and fasten off as you normally would. So this is what my back panel is looking like. I repeated that same pattern, doing an increase every stitch, then every other stitch, every 3rd stitch, every 4th stitch, every 5th stitch, until I had 11 rows. So now this is what it is looking like so far. Once we have completed our back panel, we're going to set all of this aside and now we're going to get started on working at the front panel. So let's go ahead and get started on that part. So now we're going to be getting started on working the front panel, which is very similar to the back panel, but probably easier. So we're going to begin with a slip knot. After this slip knot, we're going to make a chain of 51, but you can make this chain however long or short you would like, just as we did for the back panel. Once you have finished up working your chain, we're going to begin on row 1. Into the second chain, we're going to do double crochets into each chain all the way across until you have one chain at the end of your row remaining. So I'm going to work that up, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am all done. So once you have finished working these double crochets all the way down your chain and you have this last chain at the end remaining, into this last chain we're going to work 3 double crochets. So this is my first one, the second one, and then here's the third one. We're going to go ahead and insert a stitch marker into that very first increase that we did. So that's going to be 3 stitches back like this. Now we can just chain 1 and turn our work. Moving on to row 2, into this first stitch, we're going to work increases until we reach the stitch marker. So we're going to work 3 increases. So here's going to be my first increase. This is the second increase. And then the last increase with your stitch marker right here. Now I'm going to go ahead, take this stitch marker out, and then just put it right back on the top. Now you just want to continue working double crochets into each stitch across until you reach the end of your row. So I have just finished working to the end of row 2. I'm just going to chain 1 and turn as usual. Moving on to row 3, into this first stitch, we're just going to double crochet all the way across until you reach that first stitch marker. And so as you guys can see, I have made it to the stitch marker, because for the last row we did an increase every stitch. For this row we're going to do an increase every other stitch. So into the stitch with the stitch marker, I'm going to work a double crochet. Then I'm just going to put this right back on top as usual. For the next stitch, I'm going to do an increase. Now I'm going to do 1 regular double crochet, and then another increase, and then a double crochet, and then an increase into the last stitch. And you should always end with an increase into the last stitch of this row. Just chain 1 and turn your work. Moving on to row 4, since for this row we did an increase every other stitch, for this row we're going to do an increase every 3rd stitch. So into this first stitch I'm going to work 2 double crochets, so that's 1, and then into the next stitch. Now into this 3rd stitch we're going to do that increase, work 2 double crochets into this 1 stitch. Now just repeat this pattern, working 2 double crochets and then an increase until you reach the stitch marker. I'm just going to work my very last increase into this stitch marker, just like this. Then just taking my stitch marker out and then putting it right back on top. Now to finish up row 4, double crochet into each stitch across until you reach the end of your row. Chain 1 and turn your work. Once you have finished working all the way down row 4, I'm just going to chain and turn my work as usual. Now to continue this front panel, you probably guessed the pattern that we're going to do here. But for row 2, we did an increase every stitch. For row 3, we did an increase every other stitch. For row 4, we did an increase every third stitch. So you just want to continue this pattern for our front panel with our increases and our stitch marker until you have 9 rows in total. So we've already done 4 rows together, so I'm basically just going to do 5 more rows until I have 9 rows, and I'm going to see you guys back to cut and fasten off. And then after that, we're going to get started on working the second front panel. But yeah, I'm going to work this up, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am all done. So this is what my work is looking like after I have finished my 11 rows for my first front panel. I just repeated that same pattern that we did for our back panel, and then I cut and fasten off once I reach the end. So now that we have our first front panel, we're going to set this aside. Now we're going to get started on working the second front panel. So let's go ahead and get started on that. So now we're going to be moving on to the second front panel. To do that, I'm going to make a slip knot. Once you have your slip knot, we're going to begin with a chain of 51. Once you have your chain of 51, beginning on row 1, we're going to skip this first chain and insert our hook into the second chain. We're going to be working 3 double crochets into this one chain. So here's my first double crochet, then here's the second double crochet, then here's the third, just like this. So now you just want to double crochet into each chain all the way across your row until you have reached the very end. So I just finished working these double crochets into each of my chains. So now I'm just going to chain 1 and turn my work. And I forgot to mention for row 1, you do want to insert your stitch marker into that third stitch. I'm just going to count 3 stitches and just insert my hook into that third stitch because that's where we did our increase. Just like this. Moving on to row 2, beginning into this first stitch, we're just going to double crochet into each stitch all the way down our work until you have reached this first stitch marker. So once you have made it all the way down row 2 and you have reached this stitch marker, into these 3 stitches, we're going to work increases. Here's my first increase. I'm just going to take this stitch marker out and then put it back into that first stitch that we did, just like this. Then just increase into these next 2 stitches as well. Now I'm just going to chain 1 and turn my work. Moving on to row 3, we're going to increase every other stitch until you reach that stitch marker. So into this first stitch, I'm going to work 1 regular double crochet, and then increase into the next stitch. 1 regular double crochet, and then increase into the next stitch. Then here's my last regular double crochet, and then here's my last increase into this stitch marker. I'm just going to put the stitch marker back on top. Oops. Once you have finished your increases, you can just go ahead and double crochet into each stitch across until you reach the end, chain one and turn your work. But since I have already showed this process pretty much 2 other times in this video, to continue the pattern for our front panel, all you want to do is just repeat the same pattern. So we increase every other stitch, then increase every 3 stitches, every 4 stitches, 5 stitches with our stitch marker until you have a total of 9 rows, and we had 9 rows for the first front panel. So pretty much do that same exact thing. The only difference between this front panel and the first front panel is that we started off into that first chain with those 3 double crochets instead of doing it at the end. And that's going to make sure that our front panels are facing the correct way whenever we go to seam it all up. But yeah, I'm going to finish up these 9 rows, pretty much the same thing that we have been doing, and then I'm going to see you guys back to cut and fasten off. So I have just finished up working my second front panel. I have 11 rows in total, so this is what my work is looking like so far. I did go ahead, cut and fasten off once I reached the end, and now that we have our first and second front panels, we can now move on to seaming all the pieces together, so our back panel and our 2 front panels together. So let's go ahead and seam the bodice. To begin seaming up the bodices, I have placed the 2 front panels directly on top of the back panel, and I made sure to line up all of the sides and everything. Once you have that done, I have my tapestry needle with some yarn. We're going to begin into the very bottom of our curve. So here's the bottom of our curve, is right about here. And we're going to whip stitch all the way up the side until we have 6.5 inches from the top remaining. And that 6.5 inches from the top is going to leave room for our sleeve. To show you guys how to whip stitch, I'm just going to insert my hook right into this first stitch and then into the next stitch for the back panel and just pull straight through. Doing this again, I'm just going to insert my hook into the next 2 stitches and just pull through. Coming back around into the next 2 stitches and pull through. Now just continue whip stitching until you have 6.5 inches from the top. So I have my ruler over here. So I'm just going to keep on going until I have my length, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am done. So I have just finished whip stitching up the side until I had the 6.5 inches from the top. So you can just go ahead, fasten off, and then just weave in that loose end. Once you have done one side, you of course want to do this to the opposite side as well. Same exact thing to make your armholes. So I'm just going to finish up seaming my bodice, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I'm all done. So I have just finished up seaming up my bodice. I had done both of the sides, leaving this 6.5 inch gap on the other side as well. And I did go ahead and seam up these what are they called? Oh right, shoulder straps. I seamed up these shoulder straps, and what I did here is that I went 3.5 inches across this row. So I started in the very corner and then went 3.5 inches. Same thing on the opposite side as well. Starting into this very top corner, I whip stitch 3.5 inches, just like this. So once you have your bodice all seamed up, we're now going to begin on working on the sleeves. So let's go ahead and get started on the sleeves. So now we're going to get started on the sleeves. I'm first going to go ahead and make a slip knot. After the slip knot, you can go ahead and insert your hook right into the seam of our work. And now to secure, we're going to slip stitch, so just yarn over and pull through everything to secure. From here, we're going to chain 1, And now beginning on row 1 into this first stitch, we're going to work double crochets coming all the way around our armhole until you reach the end. To show you guys how to do that, just into this very first stitch, I'm going to work a double crochet as you normally would, and then just continue to work these double crochets into each stitch all the way around. And then once I reach the end, I'm going to show you guys how to connect this row. So I just finished working these double crochets coming all the way around my armhole. Now to join each row, we're going to slip stitch into this very first stitch. So just right into this first stitch that we made, yarn over and pull through everything. So that should join the row nicely. Moving on to row 2, I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. For row 2, beginning into this first stitch, we're going to double crochet into each stitch all the way around. Once you reach the end, you want to once again slip stitch into that first stitch to join, chain 1 and turn your work. But I'm just going to go all the way around my work, and then I'm going to show you guys how to join this row one more time. So as you guys can see, I have just finished working all the way around my armhole once again, and now to join this row, we're going to slip stitch into this first stitch. So right into this first stitch, I'm just going to slip stitch, chain 1 and turn my work. So the next row, which is row 3, all that's going to be is just a repeat of row 2. So just double crochet into each stitch all the way around, slip stitch into that first stitch, chain 1 and turn your work. So I'm going to work up row 3 really quickly, and for row 4, that's where we're going to begin doing the decreases for our sleeve. So I'm going to work that up, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am all done. So once you have finished up row 3, which was just a repeat row of row 2, we're going to begin on row 4, which is going to be our first decrease row for the sleeve. To begin row 4 into this very first stitch, so we're going to skip this first chain as usual. Into this first stitch, we're going to do our first double crochet decrease. To do a double crochet decrease, yarn over, insert your hook into that first stitch, yarn over, pull through, insert your hook into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3, and then yarn over, pull through 2. Now from here, you want to double crochet into each stitch around until you have 2 stitches at the end of your row remaining. Once we have those 2 stitches at the end of our row, I'm going to show you guys how to do that decrease one more time. So as you guys can see, I have finished working all the way around my row until I have 2 stitches at the end. Into these last 2 stitches, we're going to do another double crochet decrease. To do a double crochet decrease, yarn over, insert your hook into that next stitch, pull up a loop, insert your hook into that next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3, and then yarn over, pull through 2. To finish off the row, just slip stitch into that first stitch to join, chain 1 and turn your work. So to continue this pattern for our sleeve, you just want to repeat row 2, which is that regular row of double crochets, and then row 4, which is our decrease of double crochets, until you have a total of 14 rows. So I'm going to go ahead, repeat alternating row 2 and row 4, our decreases and normal rows, until I have a total of 14 rows, and I'm going to see you guys back once I'm all done. Alright guys, so I have made it back here with my 14 rows for my sleeve. I repeated row 2 and row 4. That row 4 was the round of decreases, and I repeated that until I had 14 rows in total, as you guys can see. So now to continue this pattern for our sleeve, you want to repeat row 2, which is just that regular row of double crochets, slip stitches to secure, chain 1, turn your work, until you have a total of 32 rows. So that's going to be about 16 more rows left to our sleeve, but you can make this however long you would like. I'm going to make a full length sleeve, so I'm going to do 16 more rows. So yeah, that is the rest of our sleeve. Once you finish those rest of the rows, you can just go ahead, cut and fasten off. So I'm going to work those rows and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am all done. So I have made it back here and I have just finished working my sleeve. I completed my 32 rows in total. This is where we did those 14 decreases and then our 16 rows of regular rows until the end. I of course cut and fastened off as usual. Once you have worked one side, you do of course want to repeat this process on the other side as well so that you have two sleeves as I have here. Now that we have both of our sleeves for each of our armholes, we're going to go ahead and work the front border and collar coming up and around the edge. So let's go ahead and get started with those steps. So now we're going to be moving on to working the front border for our sweater. Over here I have my hook and my yarn. I'm going to go ahead and make a slip knot. Once you have made your slip knot, into this very bottom corner, so it's just one of the sides of the bottom corner, I'm going to insert my hook and then slip stitch to secure. So just yarn over and pull through everything. Now beginning on the foundation row, we're going to first make a chain of 1. Now beginning into this first row, you want to work 2 double crochets per each side row. And then once you reach the stitches on the side, you can just work 1 double crochet coming up and all the way around. But just to recap this, for every single side row, you want to work 2 double crochets, and then for every single stitch, regular stitch, just work 1 double crochet. I hope that makes sense. So for the first section that we have, we're going to be working on the sides. So to do that, I'm going to again work 2 double crochets. This is my first double crochet. And then into that same row, I'm going to work a second double crochet. Again, I'm going to work 1 double crochet. And then a second double crochet into that same row. Just like this. So again, I'm going to continue on working this foundation row, working 2 double crochets per side row and then a regular double crochet each stitch up and all the way around until I reach the opposite corner on this side. So I'm going to go ahead, work that up, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am reached the end. Okay guys, so I have just finished working this foundation row. I did these double crochets coming all the way up and around, as you guys can see. And I have finished reaching the opposite corner. Once you reach the end, you just want to go ahead, chain 1 and turn your work. So the last row that we're going to do, which is going to be the first row for our front border, is beginning into this first stitch. All we're going to do is just double crochet into each stitch all the way around until you reach the end. Then you can go ahead, cut and fasten off. But I'm just going to go ahead, work a double crochet into each stitch all the way around, and I'm going to see you guys back once I have reached the end. So I just finished working my front border. We basically just did 2 rows, and then once I reached the end, I did go ahead, cut and fasten off, as you guys can see. So now that we have our front border all done, that was really easy. We're now just going to get started on the collar, which is also super easy as well. The first thing I'm going to do for this is that I'm going to make a slip knot. And now we're going to insert our hook into the corner. And once you have made your slip knot, we're going to insert our hook into this very top corner. So here's my very top corner. And then just slip stitch to secure, just as you normally would. From here, chain 1 and turn your work. So for this first row, what we're going to do is just double crochet into each of these stitches until you have made it to the opposite corner on the other front panel. So just beginning into this first stitch, I'm just going to work these double crochets, and then I'm going to see you guys back once I am at the end. Once you have finished working these double crochets into each stitch around until you've met the opposite corner, you can go ahead, chain one, and turn your work. Now to continue this collar for our front panel, we're basically just going to work 2 more double crochet rows. So just beginning into this first stitch, work double crochets into each stitch all the way across, chain one, turn your work, and then just do another row until you have 3 rows in total for your collar. That seems very straightforward, so I'm just going to work up this collar, which is 2 more rows for me, and then I'm going to see you guys back to cut and fasten off. Now I just finished working my collar. I made 3 rows in total, 1 foundation row and then 2 other regular double crochet rows. Once I reached the end, I did go ahead, cut and fasten off as usual. And then once I was done, I folded it in half so that it made us a nice beautiful color, as you guys can see. From here, the next step to our project would be to add 2 pockets on the side. This is an optional step, you can do it or not do it. I personally like the look of the 2 pockets, but you can just stop here with the video and just weave in all of your loose ends to finish the sweater. But I'm going to show you guys how to make the 2 pockets into the next section of this video. So let's go ahead and move on with those steps. So now we're going to begin working our 2 pockets on our 2 front panels. The first thing I'm going to do is just make a slip knot. Then from here you want to make a chain of 12. Once you have finished your chain of 12, beginning on row 1 into the second chain, we're going to double crochet into each chain all the way across. After you have worked these double crochets into each of these chains, I'm just going to chain 1 and turn my work. Moving on to row 2, into this first stitch, we're going to double crochet into each stitch all the way across our row. And as always, once you reach the end, chain and turn your work. So to continue the pattern for our pocket, it's again really simple. All you want to do is repeat row 2 with these double crochets into each stitch across your row until you have a total of 8 rows. But you can make this however long you would like, that's totally fine. I'm just choosing to make 8 rows. After you have your 8 rows, you should get something that looks like this. After you have your pocket, the last thing you would need to do for your project is just to seam 3 sides of your pocket, leaving the top of it open, of course, because it's a pocket. The last thing you want to do is just seam your pocket on these 3 sides, leaving the top of it open, and then you want to make 2 of these, one on this side, one on this side, and then just attach it as you normally would with a tapestry needle and some yarn. Because I've pretty much already showed how to do that on camera, I'm going to finish up my 8 rows, attach both of my pockets, and then I'm going to see you guys back for our finished sweater. So this is what my work is looking like after I have just attached the 2 pockets to my front panels. You can place this anywhere you would like. But now that we have everything assembled, that is actually the end to our project. The last thing you would need to do is just weave in all of your loose ends to finish. But that is the end of the tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed and found this helpful, and I hope to see you guys back next time. Bye! If you guys enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. If you bought this pattern, it would be super helpful if you left a positive review. That's all guys, bye!